Welcome to FoxNews.com, live streaming from the Republican National Convention here in Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome. We're taking you behind the scenes. Right now we're going to talk with Dane Waters, who's the co-founder of Delegates Unbound. Delegates Unbound takes on a special meaning at this convention because yesterday we saw the delegates, Dane, try to create a coup against the man that we right now have just seen nominated as the Republican to run for president in 2016, Donald Trump. But yesterday on the floor there was an effort by a group of renegade delegates to say, hey, we want a vote. We don't want to be bound on the first ballot. Were you involved?
Oh, we were involved. I mean, we helped basically make that happen along with a couple of other stakeholders. But we felt very strongly that the delegates should have the opportunity to vote their conscience. And this is all about, I mean, for Donald Trump and the Republican Party to say they want unity, what better way to unify the party than to allow the delegates to freely choose Donald Trump?
But on the other hand, Reince Priebus, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, wants an orderly convention. And his argument is the delegates were promised their voters that they would vote for whoever the voters selected on the first ballot. What's your argument with that?
Well, you know, the only time delegates have ever been bound to vote a specific way was in 1976 in the Ford-Reagan convention. Up until the Rules Committee voted on Thursday night to bind the delegates had the right to vote their conscience. And the delegates are the true authority of the Republican Party. The Republican Party is a private association. The citizens, you know, and what the delegates should do is take into consideration these preference primaries, but they also should figure out if the nominee represents the values of the party or is electable in November. That is the responsibility of the delegates. And Reince Priebus, I mean, you know, to me, I mean, he's the head of the Republican Party, and he should welcome the delegates freely choosing and unifying the party.
But the counter-argument coming from Paul Manafort, the chairman of the Trump campaign, is, in fact, this is ignoring the will of the voters, the plurality of whom chose Donald Trump as the nominee. So you're having an elite group, the delegates, act in a contrary manner to the will of the voters.
Well, I mean, either you have the primaries or you have the nominating convention. I mean, the rules of the Republican Party specifically say that the delegates have the authority to make the nomination. And as far as the will of the people, listen, 54% of the voters voted against Donald Trump, and Donald Trump only received 9% of all the registered voters in this country. And even when Donald Trump's up against nobody, 52% of Republicans don't want him. So there's no mandate for Donald Trump to be the nominee. But either in this country, either you have to have nominated conventions or you have the primary system, one or the other. But Reince Priebus, who's the head of the Republican Party, understands it's a private association. His power and the power of the party comes from the delegates. And either he respects that or he doesn't.
Well, if you have a moment here where clearly Republicans are trying to present a unified front, don't you see it as a contrary force undermining the efforts and the brand of the Republican Party?
Well, listen, you know, the way the process works is that we all a process that should allow free debate about whom the nominee is going to be. And then once the convention's over, then that is really when the Republican Party puts forth their best foot as far as, you know, best nominee. But once again, it's you know, if the Republican Party and Donald Trump really believe they have the support that they claim, then let the delegates freely choose that individual. I mean, he's the only horse in the race, so I don't know who are they going to vote for. So, you know, to unify the party, they should allow the delegates to vote their conscience. They leave here in Cleveland and say, listen, all the delegates, and then i.e. the will of the people, voted for me, and let's move forward to November.
Well, you know what's curious to me is the way you present it is the delegates are the voice of the people. The way the Trump folks present it is they're elites. They're an elite selected by the party. And in fact, their argument is that process could easily be rigged, distorted, in smoke-filled rooms versus people who go to the polls and vote. And the Donald Trump, as you point out, won the plurality of that vote over 16 other candidates.
Well, he did, but first, what's lost in all this is who these delegates actually are. I mean, these are delegates are everyday people, moms and dads across the country, like Lori Hack out of Arizona, who's a mother of 3, participating in the electoral process for the first time, coming here. So these delegates are not Washington insiders. And these delegates, you know, as I said, their responsibility, because it is a private association. I, as a taxpayer, first of all, can't understand why I'm paying for a primary system for the Democrats as well, but I am. But the Republican Party, the history of the Republican Party has always been that they have the right to choose their nominee. It's a private association. the citizens of this country have a constitutional right to choose the President of the United States. They do not have the constitutional right to choose the head of a private association.
Okay, if it's the case that you go back to the primaries, and you said we should have a primary process or you should have a convention,
Right.
which is your pick?
Or the convention. I mean, listen, the primary system came about because of the smoke-filled rooms deals. I mean, the reality is we live in a social media world, so that'd be kind of difficult to do these days of like the late 1800s, early 1900s. But on top of that, there are other political parties in this country, you know, whether they're mainstream or not. I mean, my opinion is that every political party should put forth their nominee and let them fight it out to the convention. But what you're seeing is in these primaries, I mean, they're inflating, you know, like Donald Trump and on the other side Hillary Clinton, millions upon millions of dollars are spent building their name ID. To what end? I mean, you know, a party has to have boundaries. You can't have a party without boundaries. And as of now, if you allow any individual to come in and run on behalf of either a Democrat or the Republican Party, there are no boundaries.
You know, this was such a contentious year in terms of having 17 people running for the Republican nomination. But when the money was spent, especially for Jeb Bush, the former governor of Florida, it did not have that consequence, Dean. It did not propel him to victory. People still voted for Donald Trump. Now, you said this is a media-driven environment, and Trump obviously dominated.
Yeah.
Does that equal the money in smoke-filled rooms?
No, I think first and foremost, just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean you can get anything. I mean, to me, that proves that you can't buy an election for the amount of money that you spend. But second of all, I think that, you know, I mean, Donald Trump, I don't want to say it's an unfair advantage. I mean, Donald Trump was, I mean, the media, they love ratings, and they bring individuals on that creates ratings. But it also goes back to the American public. They're hungry for change. I mean, I'm like everyone else. We're hungry for change. We're angry with what's going on in Washington. Donald Trump represented that to a lot of people. I even early on wanted Donald Trump, but after months of listening to what he had to say, then I decided that, you know, he wasn't the person for me. So I understand why Donald Trump is where he is. But at the end of the day, it's like going out on your first date. The voters in February in New Hampshire said, okay, we like him. Okay, but fast forward 6 months later, and you know, why should they be bound to this individual if they change their mind 6 months later? That's like going out on a date and you're forced to keep dating that individual. So that's just one of the fundamental flaws, and I do believe there's a total misunderstanding about how the primary system and the parties work in this country. Listen, I've got hundreds and hundreds of emails from people saying that I'm taking away their constitutional right because they voted for Donald Trump. Once again, it's a private association. It's like, to me, I mean, not to demean the Republican Party, but it's like a Kiwanis Club. I mean, the Kiwanis Club has the right to choose their own nominee. But as I said, let the Republican Party and the Democratic Party put forth their best candidate and see what happens. But I will also maintain that, you know, I don't think Donald Trump's electable. I really don't. And I also think that he's going to impact down-ballot candidates, and that the U.S. Senate's going to be in jeopardy. So what we're trying to do, honestly, outside of just making sure that the delegates can freely choose, and as I said, if they freely choose, they freely choose, but, you know, we need to find a candidate who truly can beat Hillary Clinton in November.
So you think this whole thing is a fraud?
Well, the whole thing about the primary system?
Yeah.
I think fraud's too strong of a word, but I think that it's seriously flawed, okay?
No, I mean the convention. So here we are tonight. Trump now has the nomination, and supposedly the delegates, bound by the will of the voters, nominated Donald Trump. You're saying, no, really, these delegates didn't have the free will. And if they had the free will, they might not have nominated Donald Trump.
Well, that's exactly right. And what was, in addition to that, I mean, you know, what you saw yesterday was a showdown about the rules. I mean, the fact that the Republican Party basically said, you delegates, you know, there are 112 people on the Rules Committee. Okay, 112 people decided, you know, to recommend what the rules were. But what they did, they actually shut down the delegates from having the opportunity to even vote on those rules. And so that just shows the lengths that the Republican Party is willing to go to ensure that Donald Trump is the nominee. And I just can't understand that if they want to have unity, why are they, shutting down even a vote on the rules? You know, working together with a lot of other stakeholders, I mean, there was a process in which you collect the majority of signatures in 7 states. It requires a roll call vote. Well, we submitted signatures for 11 states, and we have copies of them and all that kind of stuff. Then suddenly they said, oh, you know, you only have 9, and 3 states' signatures were pulled. I mean, we've asked them to prove that, and they haven't. So, I mean, it's just interesting that the lengths that they're going to go to shut the delegates out. And once again,
well, quick question.
Yeah.
If you actually had that vote,
Yeah.
Do you think you would have won?
I think we could have, but at the end of the day, the vote would have just said, would have sent it back to the Rules Committee for the opportunity the delegates would have said, we don't like these rules, go back and try again. That's all it would have done. It wouldn't have changed, it would have changed the binding aspect, hopefully, because, as I said, it was the first time.
But would it have taken the nomination away from Donald Trump?
I think it could have, because in those rules, they actually voted for the first time since 1976 to bind the delegates. And if they had taken that provision out, then I really feel pretty confident that the delegates would vote for somebody other than Donald Trump. But as I said, that's our goal at Delegates Unbound, is just to ensure that the delegates can freely vote, and that completely has been taken away from them.
Dane Waters is co-founder of Delegates Unbound. You can talk to him at Twitter at Dels Unbound, DELSUNBOUND. Thank you for joining us here.
Thank you very much.
FoxNews.com, live streaming from the Republican National Convention in Cleveland, Ohio.